there any questions? I mean, how much does everyone know about Bradley Manning? Do you mind if I'll just open up the floor briefly about that, and then I'll go back to it and we can go into questions. I mean, for example, what do you know?
I know everything except, I know a lot, but I don't know the details how, and I'm informed, good informed.
Okay, yes.
Is he being charged with anything?
So that's a good question.
What other formal charges?
That's a good question. I'd like to come. I'll come back to that question. I'll come back to that. What do you know about Bradley?
I think very interesting were the transcripts of those kind of public hearings that there were in the trial of Bradley. You read that stuff and it's like, oh, remember the guy? There was a guy who posted it online. He was also kind of stopped and beaten after.
Who specifically?
This journalist who then leaked the transcript. Was that a hearing?
I can only say there's been a lot of harassment around people who have been Bradley Manning supporters. I've known people who have suffered, and I've known of people I don't know who have had. So I don't know who you're talking about.
This was like 5 or 6 months ago. It was one of these public hearings about the case in the U.S. And this guy then posted online hearings, the transcript of the, so basically how he was denied. It was still like mentally ill.
Well, there's all kinds of things that are incredibly hinky about this case. The number one thing is that Bradley is not facing anything close to a fair trial. It's a military tribunal. That's mostly what he's facing. He has 23 charges that are on top of his head. 23 charges. Thank you very much. Thanks. He's got 23 charges. They're military charges, one of which the prosecution is claiming. The prosecution is also the military, as well as the judge. There's nothing remotely fair about this. There's nothing remotely public about it. There's a well-known lawyer for the Center for Constitutional Rights. His name is Michael Ratner. He's one of the best U.S. constitutional experts, in the world. And he's tried to follow the case, and he has been unable to follow what I call a process. It's a tribunal. It's not a trial. There's so much of it that's kept secret that it's very impossible to follow what these proceedings are. But there are 23 charges, one of which is aiding the enemy, carries with it the death penalty. So that's very significant. That death penalty has not been taken off the tray. That has not been taken off. So that's very important. The prosecution say they're not going to go for that. They're not going to go for the death penalty. But make no mistake about it, there's nothing preventing the judge, if that's what we want to call him, from making the death penalty. But I'm ever optimistic, no matter what the conclusion of this, whether it's flushed out, because they could just drop this at any point. I think some sort of, or whether he's given a supposed life sentence. I think having some sort of a fair trial alongside of that would be a better process. It would not be the first time in world, or certainly not U.S. history, where something that's quite military has been taken out into the public sector. But that's basically what he's facing right now, and he's held up very strongly to this. He's a real fighter. And I think that the best, everything that we can do to build solidarity links between other people who are suffering under U.S. oppression is really the best that I can do. But that's the key thing. If there's only one key thing to walk away from, is that he is a political prisoner and that he's facing a military tribunal, not a trial. There's the U.S. military, particularly in Guantanamo and lots of other places, they're sort of creating these fluffy courts that don't really have any merit, and they make them out to be sort of like a stage setting. Sorry, yes.
Was Bradley Manning a U.S. military officer?
He is. He was a private. Like some of the better people, I guess, in the world. He didn't match well with the U.S. military. Put it that way. So he had a sort of a difficult period with it. But I'm sorry if I didn't explain that further. He joined the military, I think it's in his early 20s. Basically, he went through a period of homelessness. He was living in his car. I should actually explain maybe some details about his life. I mean, he only had 22 years of his life previous to being incarcerated. He's been incarcerated for 2 years. So, I mean, at the end of the day, he was born in the United States, born in Oklahoma, to a Welsh mother and an American serviceman who was also involved in computers. They met in Pembrokeshire, where he was serving in the U.S. military. Come on, this is Bradley Manning meeting. We're talking about Bradley Manning. Okay. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Grazie. In a way, Bradley's life is sort of like was sort of in the military right from the beginning. His existence is due to the fact that his father was in the military and met his mother in Pembrokeshire, Wales. But Bradley himself was born in Oklahoma, his mother split up with the father, and he spent a good number of years, sort of his, I guess, I don't know what they call it in Italy, but the junior high school years were spent in Wales. When he was 17, he went back to live with his father in Oklahoma, who had formed another relationship. And he didn't get along with his father's partner. Now, this caused him to basically go through periods where he was of precarity. So he was living in his car for a long period, working at Starbucks. He had a job where he was working for a computer firm for a while, and he did some pretty extraordinary things. He sort of did a sort of a social networking thing, a sort of a Facebook type thing. But unfortunately, due to his sort of very strong personality, it didn't work out for him. So he was advised by his father to join the military, and then he would be able to go to school for free, because that's the only way it works in the U.S. In the U.S., you don't get to go to school. I would say we're a very strict class and caste system, and that's one of the ways that certain classes of people are kept out. So that was it. But one of the things is during the course of his time in the military, he was nearly ready to be sort of kicked out at one juncture. Just because the U.S. was just so desperate to keep boots on the ground, as they say, they reassigned him, they redeployed him, and it was part of an intelligence unit. Now, what that means is that he was in Iraq, and he would sort of sit in a tent alongside other people. He was only a private. He had access to the information that was eventually released through WikiLeaks. This information in all the computer systems was available to 3.5 million U.S. servicemen. So this tells us a lot of things. It tells us that 3.5 human beings have witnessed some footage of this at some point, and that perhaps the processes of reporting these sorts of things were very poor. Or nobody thought that this was worthy of release. And we always say he's the accused releaser, because that's really that's down to the courts to try to prove that he is. But if he is, we say it lies up for Bradley Manning. We say that he's a real hero for having done this, because it's a disgrace that 3.5 million human beings have access to this information and don't take action on it, because it's an absolute disgrace. This war. I think it was more than this person, than Bradley could take, and that's why he was doing it. So,
is it likely that even though they have the death penalty as an option, that it will be much more to the U.S. establishment advantage to say he's completely mad, let's just put him away for life as mad? I mean, is that the way?
I think it's yes. It's kind of way past that now, because he's so well known as a public figure. I find that almost when I begin to tell the story of who he is, if they don't recognize the name right off the bat, they sort of know who it is. So I think it's kind of way past that. And we at Wise Up for Bradley Manning, we don't like the whole idea of Assange bad, Bradley mad, because it isn't a mad idea to oppose this war. It isn't a mad idea when you have access to useful information, to do something about this undemocratically decided invasion of another country. But I'll get back to you. Sorry, let me sort of. I was going to finish. I want to finish.
It's in the flow of your. Sorry.
Okay, sure.
Just to understand our hero better, in these alleged logs, he says about. He writes about. This shows how the third world is being exploited, and for me, this is an astonishing level of theoretical understanding of world economics, and where did he get that from with his background?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question, and a different question. I'll come back to resolving this question of you, because I do want to say this. But I think I don't specifically have answers to that. There are people. There's a man named Tim Price who wrote a play, The Radicalization of Bradley Manning. It was done for the yes, you should look that up, for the Welsh National Theatre. It's a stunning piece. It's a wonderful work. But I was discussing with him and one of the researcher who was doing it. It's not my view, because it's unknown what. I think it's generally unknown what it could be. But his view on it is it was his experience in Wales. Education, the emphasis on what younger people are learning. And by the way, he was only in school in 2004, 2002. It wasn't a long time ago. I think it's perhaps how the Welsh schools emphasize their working class histories a lot more so. And that was his theory, because it's the only thing you can pin it upon. I personally, because we're all projecting, the things I'm discussing are not projections, they're things that have happened. But what we're talking about now, you're right, he's got an advanced idea and he's acted on it, rather than, I think to myself, in the real world, because we all come together and I'm talking about the social forum here in Florence. We come together and we exchange ideas, we have different ideas of things. But most of the economic ideas are not truths. They're sort of a complicated spider web of kind of nonsense, and we all read it in different ways. A little bit of truth, it dispatches the spider web. And I think my personal view on this, which is a little different than what I've just said about Mr. Tim Price's view, my view is that it's just amoral to look at the footage, the collateral murder footage, this is the truth. We've documented this. The whole military field, the whole corporate culture in military, they would look at these videos of people being shot and they would laugh at it. They would sort of make it like it's a joke. Or the distinguishment between watching something that's real and watching something that's not real is very difficult. That process doesn't begin in the military. I think it begins in reality television shows. It begins in not knowing the difference between, there was a reality television show in Britain where somebody was shot in the head with an arrow and killed. And they were just sort of laughed about this. I think that this is not an accident that this is kind of happening. I think it's the only moral conclusion you have when you watch the footage. And again, this is a personal projection, but I only saw the collateral murder video a number of months ago personally. I just wouldn't put myself through that. Come on, it's Bradley Manning, baby, come on in. It's okay, we can stand at the door. It's fine, we're happy to have you there. But, I never watched the collateral murder video because I was actually so upset after watching it. The room full of people were so upset in watching this footage. Why put myself through it? I know I'm opposing the war, all this, etc., etc. I only watched that footage once, and it was horrendous. What you might not know if you ever watched the collateral murder video, and I recommend you be aware of it, but I don't always recommend anybody watch it, because it's horrible. There are two people who were shot in a car. You can't tell by the blurriness of the image, but it's two children. It's a 6-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy who survived, but they were shot in the stomach, and they can show that. You can look up, there's an Al Jazeera video on this. So I think when you're watching footage of this, regardless of being in the militarized environment, I think to myself, it's very disgraceful, and I think any moral person would react this way. So I don't think that we have to say, oh, he doesn't have the framework. I know exactly what you mean. It's a very advanced thing to do to understand it and then take action. But I think he's a very clever person, and I think that's maybe one of the difficulties he had living in the United States. Yes?
was wondering if you had a list handy of the actual charges he was charged with.
I don't have it. I basically hear at Last Minute Productions. I just jumped on a plane with a couple of posters, and no, I don't. But you can find that online. It's very easy. If you Google up 23 charges Bradley Manning, you'll come up with those charges. One of the most stunning things about these charges that I can tell you that's very important is there was a group of Bradley Manning supporters who went into the, there was a fundraising dinner maybe about a year and a half ago in San Francisco. And it was very disgraceful that President Obama, who is a genuine constitutional expert, he's a Harvard law graduate, but he's one of the worst people for the Constitution. We can discuss that a little bit at length. But he basically said that Bradley Manning is guilty. He said openly, Bradley Manning committed a crime. Now that is absolutely disgraceful. He would know as a constitutional expert, thank you very much, he would know as a constitutional expert that, that would prejudice his case because he's facing a military tribunal. He's not facing a trial, he's facing a military tribunal. So he is the head of the military. So he's prejudiced this person's case. So it's hokey all around. Yes?
But military trials, I mean, how would, if he was in the military and that's the only way that he got this information, how could he, not to say that the system isn't fucked up, but how could, in the current system, how could he not be getting a military trial if, as a U.S. soldier?
Okay, I'll answer that. There has to be mechanisms, and there are mechanisms. Ostensibly, there are mechanisms within the military for reporting things that are going around. But sorry to say it crudely, but there's a saying in the U.S. military. I've never been in the U.S. military. There's a saying that shit comes from top down, not bottom up, meaning that you just get in line and get in order. And there's also an awareness that what they're doing is a crime. Maybe not the people who do it. I just think that those mechanisms are very poorly served, they're very poorly used, and I don't think it's unintentional. I say that there has to be a way for us to get this information. We have to be able to get this information. So if it doesn't come, one of the things our class has is we have creativity. We have the capacity to use the materials that are around us. And one of the things about the ruling classes is they shouldn't be able to, we shouldn't allow them to. They have the capacity, they have the ability and the authority to alter the jurisdictions so that these mechanisms don't work as well. I think that the Bradley Manning case highlights a lot of things, but it highlights how judiciary is being changed and all of the methods that we think are available to us in the law courts aren't available to us. And that's what makes hopefully it's not a sacrifice, that's what makes his work, that's what makes him so brave, I think. The result I hope to have is just having these talks highlights Bradley Manning in people's minds, and I hope that when you go back to your activism, to your trade unions, to your communities, I hope that you bring Bradley Manning with you. We do everything we can within the UK. We work with the Tala Hassan case, the Babar Ahmed campaign. These are two people who were extradited under the absolutely wicked US-UK extradition treaty. Many countries have very strong extradition treaties. We don't need more corn through the goose legislation. So we try to extend our campaign. It's not a one-man band campaign. But I've been very inspired by his action. The man's half my age. And I think this is this is real inherent to win stuff. This is one of the most important cases of our time. So I've kind of jumped all around the houses, but I like a very open forum anyway of people talking. I hope I'm answering everyone's questions. If you have other questions, maybe somebody else could ask a question. All your questions are great. Okay, go ahead. What are you going to ask?
Well, I'm going to ask what exactly is he accused of doing? Like what? He wasn't private with access to this information. Is there any information of how that information?
So basically his name, as far as I know.
I can answer that. None of the information that WikiLeaks has released, and by the way, none of that information has legally been able to be linked to Bradley Manning. That information was just released through WikiLeaks. Bradley in an email to a friend because he was feeling very lonely. This is also another element of Bradley's life, is that Bradley's a gay man. In the military, he faced a lot of homophobia, and it was very heavy at times, to the point where he was getting beat up a lot. Absolutely disgraceful. He was only doing this to get an education, what we will not hear at the forum, but sometimes in Europe don't take for granted. But, you know, in terms of the charges, I'm sorry. None of the information that was released through WikiLeaks was top secret designated. There's a certain percentage of them, probably about 2/5, that are classified top secret. The rest of them are just info. It's throughout 3.5 million people of seeing it. So that's pretty much largely public domain. You have to understand is that the CIA, the FBI, the White House, all of these press departments typically, on a daily basis, release information of the same designation that was released through WikiLeaks, through the WikiLeaks. It was only classified information. It's not anything that's ever going to harm people on the ground. What harms people on the ground is the U.S. military invading a civilian area. That's what harms people on the ground. People on the ground are perfectly aware of what happens. We have many people who are soldiers who have served in Iraq, who are with our campaign, and you know, there's not one human being or one soldier who's had a precious hair on his head that's been harmed from this information being released. It's embarrassing the government, and appropriately embarrassing the government. I would say that in terms of about the specific charges, well, I think I answered the question about that. I mean, at the end of the day, most of the information is typically released by the press departments of the large U.S. government agencies. So it's one rule for some and another rule for others. We have somebody who is not, in one of the definitions of the law, which is aiding the enemy, the definition has to, in other words, he has to have intentionally wanted to serve the enemy. In other words, if you have an agent, you know, this Al-Qaeda, or whatever it happens to be, if you have an enemy and you intentionally supply them for ideological or for payment or some sort of proof that you were, you know, that is the definition in the military. So he hasn't done any of that. It's if he is the person who has released this information, he's done it purely out of morality, and it's stated is that people need to know this information. And if it is illegal for an individual who has access to it, if it is illegal to do this, it is illegal for the White House to do it. It's illegal for the Congress to do it. It's illegal for the CIA. Just because the ruling class like to do it, and they think they have the authority to do that, it's still against the law. It is in the United States. So that's an answer to the question. And if that's not an answer to the question, the best way to answer this is to go to a free and fair public trial, a constitutional trial, not these mock showcase trials.
I just want to make a point.
No, sorry.
I just wanted to
Yeah, it's okay.
say, how can they leak anything back to them? The answer is they can't. For what we know, because it's not a public trial, but it's not a trial. But there is these kind of figures like Adrian Lemo.
Yes.
You know?
This Lemo,
you know?
This was the thing. I mean, he was very lonely in the military. He was quite a well-known hacker, and he was trying to trust. And I think that from the first conversation he had with Lemo, who ran over to the FBI, yeah, he basically became an agent for the FBI at that point, and which is just quite disgraceful. But I mean, the only motivations that we know of for Mr. Manning doing this is so that we know we who live in these times. I was here in Florence 10 years ago for the European Social Forum. 10 years ago I was here. I'm here 10 years later, and when I say to people who are just bored now, 20, 30 years from now, when I talk about Iraq being a crime, you know, everyone knew it. There were 1 million people, literally 1 million people in the square and all around. Now the thing is, we all knew it was a crime. But are the newspapers of record? Are those going to be the ones that are going to record this period? Are they going to record it like this? And that's difficult to say. So it's crucial that we actually bring trials. It's crucial that we bring the ruling classes who do these things to bear. And that's without the mechanism for doing that, without the day-to-day warlords activity, how do we do that?
There's this official document which has been used by Parliament's Defense. It's a US document which says that there has been no harm from this publication. I don't know exactly, to US interest?
Yes.
I would rather have that it was not the case. This should harm US interest. Are they making a smiling face for a disaster?
Well, there's a famous comedian who's unfortunately died in the U.S. His name is George Carlin. What he says is, he says that, fascism, if it comes and when it comes, it's not going to be Jack Booth, it's not going to be obvious, it's going to be smiley faces, smiley peachy, smiley. There's an author named Barbara Enright who does a lot of working class stuff. She actually talked about the condition of smiling over this sort of forced happiness, in the misery. But I strongly recommend you look at Barbara Enright's work. She's quite wonderful in that way. I think that when we're talking about harming U.S. interests, when we're talking about what U.S. interests are, we're certainly not talking about their war effort. Yeah, I agree. It would be nice if it sort of harmed it, or et cetera, because we don't support this anyway. But at the end of the day, what they try to put forward falsely is that, well, this information is released so people have been harmed or killed, and this would be a very unpopular thing within the U.S. for people who are worried about their kids, et cetera, et cetera. But, the Iraqis know what's going on the ground. And what's actually worrying about how a military tribunal is that why they keep it in the tribunal is not any proper legal justification. It's to keep information like this out. The information that you've mentioned, that nobody has actually been harmed by this information being released. People have been embarrassed. The government is embarrassed. Their interests are embarrassed. Because right now, as things currently stand, even if Bradley gets released, if we don't make a case, if we don't bring people to the Hague, if we don't bring people to bear for what they've done, basically the criminals got away with it. They were able to go into Iraq, take over the country. They're still dominant in the country. They've got the world's largest embassy, if you want to call it that. It's a large military base. And they're sucking the oil out like crazy. They're sucking the oil out of Libya. There's no... If there's going to be a resistance, it has to be the resistance of accountability. 10 years ago, when I was here in Florence, 10 years ago, what they were discussing was the second world power. And that wasn't China. The second world power was the world power of people, the world power of consciousness, because it does challenge them. The only thing that the ruling classes have in their state, the only thing they have is coercion, which is cooperation, and violence. And oddly enough, the resources that they lack is violence. There isn't enough violence to keep us all down. It's our consciousness that has to be raised. And this is not the first time, well, not the first time in any history, but it's not the first time in U.S. history that a military tribunal has been brought to a trial. There's a Hollywood film that came out maybe about a year ago. I can't think of the title, but it was around Mary, I forgot her name, but it was around the U.S. Civil War. And it was specifically about what's happening on this trial. It's very relevant to this. There was an innkeeper who was the mother of the man who shot Abraham Lincoln. She was brought into, they tried to create a sort of military tribunal for her. And, there was a sort of a big tussle to bring this into a proper trial. And that was when the U.S. was in the middle of the Civil War. It was when those forces, because the U.S. Civil War didn't really die when they declared it in April 1865. There was always been a conflict, and even to this day, people in the South are very much, the South shall rise again. They still feel different as a different country. And this is a very big ramification, is that's a trial that could have torn the country apart. This is not something that's going to tear the country apart. It's going to embarrass certain people who committed war crimes. Even if he's to face the death penalty, it should be in a proper trial, and that's what we're hoping for. But our position is free Bradley Manning. He's a hero. He should be given a medal for what he's done, for the sacrifices that he's made.
I
Yes?
just wanted to make a point that I think issues, when we look at them through a moral lens, they're so obvious.
Yeah.
But I think it's like necessary to reevaluate them from the angle of understanding, accepting that America, the United States of America, is a fascist regime, and that in being moral and sharing this information with the public, however moral or heroic it was, he was